Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are joined once again by Ambassador Chas Freeman, a former Assistant Secretary of Defense and Ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Chas, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Pascal.
Chas, we have now seen that Donald Trump on the second or slash third day of the year attacked Venezuela. You, as a former U.S. official and a diplomat for the United States, what did you make out of this blatant attack on another nation?
Well, I think there are several dimensions to this that need to be explored. One is, of course, this was a meticulously planned information campaign, disinformation campaign, a lot of accusations against Venezuela, most of which had no substance. It was preceded by careful preparation of the press environment, the information environment, as well as by murders on the high seas of people who were suspected of being involved in moving drugs, not to the United States actually, but to Trinidad for onward shipment to Europe and West Africa. But quite an elaborate story was developed in the media. The Trump administration announced a revised version of the Monroe Doctrine, presaging a rampage through South America and the Caribbean, and presumably also Central America and North America in the form of Mexico. All of this was quite out in the open. And I think Nicolás Maduro discounted it too much. He seemed to believe that Trump would not be serious. So the first thing is that the operation itself was very skillfully managed. The second is that it is entirely illegal, indecent, an atrocity, really. And I think it put an end to 3 centuries of effort to develop a rule of law, facsimile internationally, starting with the 18th century and going on. And the last 50 years of the 20th century, or much of the 20th century, was spent by the United States trying to promote a vision of the rule of law internationally. That decayed by the time of the Biden administration into something called the rules-bound order, which was basically we make the rules and we enforce them on whoever we wish and exempt whoever we wish, including ourselves, from the rules. But I think what we're seeing is an international reaction that is building to this really outrageous repudiation of the whole idea of rules internationally. I've seen very strong statements by smaller countries, Singapore in your region, since you're in East Asia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. And the fact is that the rule of law has 2 purposes. One is, of course, to provide predictability to the environment, so that the people can carry on business in a normal manner, pretty sure of what is and what is not going to happen. But more importantly, it protects the weak against the strong. And the strongest country in the world now, the United States, has just repudiated all consideration of the rights of everyone else. And this is an effective, a sort of tyranny over the globe. I think, frankly, we've seen with the case of Gaza that words of outrage accomplish nothing. If this is not, if the United States is basically not subjected to sanctions by the global majority, pays price, particularly for its business elite, I think what we're looking at is a horror. I see that Mette Frederiksen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, is once again under threat from Trump about Greenland. And where does this stop? Trump came into office claiming Greenland. He's also laid a claim to Iceland, remarkably. And I don't see how the European relationship with the United States survives this kind of thing. What happens to NATO? What happens to the EU? Who stands up to this bully? I think it's really this is a Zeitenwende, if there ever was one. And I haven't even mentioned Panama. But setting a precedent, I just saw a wonderful cartoon somebody sent me with which said there was a television broadcaster saying that in news of the Western Hemisphere, a peace-loving democracy has invaded and captured the leader of the dictator of a neighboring warmongering country. And it shows the Canadian Royal Mounted Police hauling Donald Trump off. He's just set a precedent which can be applied to him. That is to say, if a leader is regarded as intolerable in his behavior, now others can take action. And somebody pointed out, what is the justification that Trump used here was that, which was fictitious for the most part, about drug production in Venezuela. The Mexican government could easily answer, since it's failed totally to get any diplomatic response to its repeated requests to stop the flow of weapons from the United States into Mexico, which are used by the drug cartels there to terrorize Mexican society. Mexicans, following this precedent, could simply bomb the places where the guns are made or stored, and they would have the precedent that Donald Trump has set as a justification. So I think this has huge implications, not just for Venezuela, and there are a number of other aspects of this that are quite absurd. It's very clear that Donald Trump expects Delcy Rodriguez, who is the constitutional successor as acting president to Nicolas Maduro, in his absence, now that he's incarcerated in New York, that they expect that because she had a major role in partial repair of the Venezuelan petroleum sector from extremely bad management under Maduro, and she revived Venezuelan oil production to a considerable extent. That just means she can be bought to help American oil companies. She can be enticed to cooperate with the United States. And so she's being subjected, on the one hand, to blandishments. If you cooperate and run Venezuela to our satisfaction, we will leave you alone and our companies will invest and everything will be wonderful for a while anyway. Of course, if you do that kind of deal with a mafioso, it doesn't last. So that's, on the other hand, she's being told, well, if you don't cooperate, your fate will be worse than Maduro's. So this is, again, the mafioso approach to managing relationships. A final note, I just would say that there's a lot of absolute nonsense in the media. There's a report that 20 plutocrats from Wall Street are headed for Venezuela to investigate oil investment opportunities. I wouldn't want to be one of those guys, given the probability that there will be armed opposition in Venezuela to this kind of thing. But quite aside from the danger that any American oil company investing in Venezuela is likely to face from guerrilla action, I think it has to be said that, I was ambassador to Saudi Arabia. At one point, I read that people had advised Henry Kissinger in an earlier era to send the military in to take over the oil fields on the operations of Saudi Aramco, and I just had a good laugh. If you know anything at all about modern petroleum industries, extractive industries, they're enormously complex. They require great expertise. They require years to revive production. There is no immediate payoff from this under any circumstances, even if the security situation permits companies other than Chevron, which has been there all along and cooperative with the regime in Venezuela, to enter the Venezuelan market. So I think this is Looney Tunes. This is complete lunacy, and it needs to be stopped. And is the world going to do something, or are we just going to do the usual European thing of, wringing your hands while sitting on them, which is an uncomfortable position, but it's about all Europeans do these days.
Well, I mean, that's I think the Swiss position, if I understand their statement. They are not happy with what happened, but they are not even willing to mention that the United States did the infringement. The European Union is more or less happy with saying that Maduro is gone. So they basically, without saying that we applaud what happened, they're saying like we're fine with the outcome. But may I ask you, like, because we do unfortunately have the precedent that these kind of operations can work. A lot of people say the Iraq war was a huge blunder and failure and whatnot. But the matter of the fact is that thanks to the 2003 invasion, the United States for the last 22 years, 23 years, has been controlling Iraq's oil. Successfully so. It also did so in Syria. So there is a history of successfully getting oil out of countries with war.
I think the case of Syria is a pretty egregious one. It is clearly motivated largely by control of the limited oil production in Syria. But I have to correct you with respect to Iraq. The primary production is all Chinese companies. So we fought the war, and somebody else reaped the benefits economically. And of course, Iraq is still very unsettled as a society and a nation, and divided, and trying to get rid of the American troop presence and continuously failing. So that is not a success. And I'm afraid that this invasion of Venezuela is fairly typical of failed American strategic reasoning. So this is one time we invade, we remove the leader, everything else is supposed to be fine. We take out Saddam, everything is solved in Iraq. We decapitate the government in Tehran with the Israelis, and everything is wonderful. And no, it isn't. And if you take out, as we did, the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is everything wonderful in Syria? I don't think so. So this is a fallacy, and it's a perpetual one. And it is very interesting to me that Venezuela has followed its constitutional process and taken Delcy Rodriguez as the acting president. She's apparently a very competent woman, educated in France. As I said, has a stellar record of management of the mess in the Venezuelan petroleum industry. So she, Trump says, or rather Marco Rubio says, and Trump echoes, well, we can work with her. She'll run the country to our satisfaction because we have her, we got her between threats and inducements. I don't think that is necessarily going to be the case. And Venezuela is a country of 30 million people. Of course, many abroad have fled the misery that our 25 years of sanctions have imposed. This isn't the first time we've kidnapped a Venezuelan president. We did that to Hugo Chavez Frias in 2002 and installed a puppet government in Caracas. which the Venezuelan military then overthrew. And Chavez came back. He died of disease in 2013, I think. Maduro was a bad, not a very competent and probably fairly brutal dictator in his country. There's nobody much who has a kind word to say for him. But a man who is totally illegitimate does not arm 4.5 million people with rifles in a people's militia. So I think the problem of legitimacy that we claim, well, he wasn't legitimate and so forth. Well, first of all, who are we to say that? But anyway, even if he wasn't legitimate in terms of having stolen an election, which we claim may be true, maybe not, that even if he wasn't legitimate in that sense, he was in charge of Venezuela, and people had accepted him in Venezuela for the most part. Those who didn't accept him, left for Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Peru, United States, other places. So I think this is far more complicated. I basically would sum it up as saying the dog has caught the car.
Yeah.
Now what?
May I ask you that though, like there's a long history, a 200-year history of U.S. intervention in, excuse me, in Latin America, also in the Pacific, interventions all over the place, including, of course, places that today are part of the United States. Hawaii, right, was
Right.
started the process by being like having a coup done to its legitimate government.
Sure.
The Queen back in 1894 or 95, I think, and so on. And South America, with Chile, with Allende, and so on, and with Panama in 89. There's so many examples, Nicaragua, whatnot. In what sense do you think the current example of Venezuela is different from, let's say, the Cold War interventionism in South America?
Well, you're right. It's 130 years of intervention. The United States spent the first 100 years of our independence proclaiming that we would never behave like the British and invade everybody. And then we did. And you're quite right. We started by overthrowing the Hawaiian monarchy. We then went on to a war with Spain, which gave us the Philippines and Puerto Rico and Guam. That was the start of that was actually under McKinley and Roosevelt. However, Woodrow Wilson, the great avatar of democracy, was by far the worst, invading Mexico, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and of course, picking up on the Roosevelt intervention that created the state of Panama, which had been part of Colombia. We separated that to our advantage. We occupied over the course of the 20th century places like Haiti for about 30 years. It didn't do the Haitians any good, as you can see from their condition today. We had the same thing in Nicaragua that produced a Somoza dictatorship. We did this in the Dominican Republic. We both installed and then removed Trujillo, and so forth and so on. So we had it's a sorry record. But it should teach us something. These interventions did not solve any problems. They did not create democracies, better societies, richer societies. They were very good in the case of, for example, Guatemala, in the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz. They were very good in terms of protecting the assets of the United Fruit Company. But they didn't do anything for Guatemalans. And, on top of everything else, we have an unholy relationship with various right-wing elements in particularly Central America. Trump just pardoned the former president of Honduras, who had been convicted of an incredible trade in narcotics with the United States. At the same time that he's accusing Maduro of doing something, he's pardoning someone who actually did what he's accusing Maduro of doing, mostly falsely. Final note here. Of course, the U.S. is asserting jurisdiction over Maduro. The Vienna Convention gives absolute immunity to a head of state or government, so this is completely illegal under international law. But this is taking place in the Southern District of New York, which is the most corrupt judicial system in the entire United States. And it will be very interesting to see the trial, because if you read the indictment, it's basically a political speech with a lot of ideological baloney.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much legal in there, and I don't know whether, as corrupt as that jurisdiction is, they can get a conviction. Of course, the precedent here that everybody cites is George H.W. Bush going to Panama and removing Noriega as the president, and then in convicting him of narcotics offenses and putting him in jail and so forth. That was widely condemned at the time as utterly illegal. It was. It's not a helpful precedent. But we have just set a precedent which is rightly regarded by smaller countries all over the world as very dangerous for them.
Yeah.
We don't seem to think it's dangerous for us, but I suspect it is. And and what will happen in the Ukraine context? Will Russia now feel they can abduct Zelensky from Kyiv? It has the capability to do that. So, what have we started? We don't know.
No, absolutely. I think this is completely right. The precedent and in general the kind of attack this represents on the norms of the entire system, yet let to speak on international law, are tremendous. Because again, like while taking out Maduro, pardoning the former dictator of Honduras who did the drug trafficking, it just shows you that the U.S., as you once said, you were the one who gave that example. The U.S. is doing rule by law, not rule of law, and it just it does whatever it wants, and it actually now says so. To everybody, because it's a great power, it can do whatever it wants. Period. And if you want to stop it, you and what army? That's I mean they're literally saying it's literally that one. But I have one question, which is the weirdest thing about this legal case, because it also shows how legalistic the United States is, right? It's a country that's used to use a legal system against others, right? There's one charge against Mr. Maduro that by any stretch of imagination just doesn't make sense to me. Possession of automatic fire weapons.
Yes.
But possession, even if he possessed that in Venezuela. In what sense is that a crime under U.S. law? I just don't understand how that ended up in there.
No, because the Trump administration has come up with a wonderful finesse of the issue. So if you invade a country and then people have machine guns and they shoot at you, they are violating the law because they are attacking you. You see?
So
you invade another
personnel being shot at, that's
they counterattack. That is an offense, you see. And, in Afghanistan, we suspended the Geneva Conventions and we invented a new category called enemy combatant, which didn't require the rights of prisoners of war that are conferred by the Geneva Convention. So the Red Cross, had no access to people in Guantanamo and the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan and so forth and so on. Anyway, there's been a steady progression in the suspension of respect for the rule of law, international treaties, conventions, the UN Charter, and it has been spearheaded by Israel, which has violated every aspect of international law with complete impunity, because my government my country has protected it and provided it with impunity. And we've now come to the point where we are emulating the complete lawlessness that the Israelis have shown.
Yeah.
I go back to the point. Gaza shows that rhetorical outrage is not enough.
Yeah.
You actually have to do something. And Israel has suffered no penalty for its genocide in Gaza. It is suffering no penalty for its illegal settlement of the West Bank and the eviction of Palestinians from their homes. It suffers no penalty for the murder, even of Americans. Journalists, American journalists, Americans on the USS, on the Liberty during the 1967 war, complete impunity. So this is the result.
Yeah.
If you have no penalty imposed, you go on doing whatever the hell you want. Yeah. And that is exactly what, as you said, that's what the United States is now engaged in. So what are we going to do about this? I think there, a couple of things come to mind. First, the international legal crisis that this has created is paralleled by a domestic constitutional crisis. We might as well get rid of the U.S. Congress and the legislative branch. They do nothing. They don't even pass budgets. They shut down the government. They don't hold the president accountable for anything he does. They don't exercise their constitutional authorities. They have the responsibility to declare war, authorize use of violence against other nations. They don't do it. They are a cult following the president. Let's just get rid of them. We might as well, since we have a dictatorship, we might as well just recognize that. Same thing internationally. Why do we have the United Nations Security Council? What the hell does it do? It serves as a forum for the United States to veto effective international action on issues on which there's a broad international consensus, whether those issues are climate change and combating it, or they are war and peace, or they are standards of human rights, or whether they are the issues of genocide and enforcement of judicial decisions by the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. No, nothing is enforced because the United States vetoes it. In an earlier era, the Soviet Union did the same thing. So why do we have this institution? It's clearly ineffectual. What can be done to restore respect for international consensus-based norms? That is the question now before us. And I've always thought, we're far too hung up on the post-World War II institutions. Of course, they give great advantages to the United States and the Russian Federation, Britain, and France, China, the nominal victors of World War II, and they don't allow the same privilege to major countries like Japan or Korea, and India, and so the system isn't working.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to let it continue not to work as the entire edifice of human decency that the West rightly claims credit for creating over the last 3 centuries is crumbling? What do we do?
How about the following? How about we change Article 51 of the UN Charter and we remove the right to self-defense? Because with this right, every single attack on a foreign country has been justified. Every single one. Just remove it. Countries will self-defend them anyhow. They will do that, but let's remove the legal right to do so.
I don't know. Actually, that right of self-defense was also deformed by the Israelis, who claimed a right of preventive defense.
Yes, that's why we need to get rid of self-defense in the first place.
Well, we need to rewrite a lot of rules. That is one of them. But I'm talking about the institutions that are supposed to enforce the norms. We don't have them. So here's my proposition. If the existing institutions don't work, then convene ad hoc conferences and make the rules among the people who attend the conferences. So if the United States doesn't want to attend the conference, fine. Let the United States do what it wants. But among the other countries, maybe starting with the BRICS as a kernel or some other group, I look at votes in the United Nations General Assembly, and I find, on a resolution proposed by, which is basically proposing motherhood, you have 3 votes, either against or in favor, depending on which side you're on: the United States, Israel, and Argentina. That's it. Maybe you get Nauru and the Marshall Islands and a couple of other places added in there, but even they often abstain rather than stand with. So then you have 149 countries or 157 countries who are voting for something, and you have this little minority that's voting against it, and nothing happens. So the resolution is nugatory. It has no effect at all. What kind of system is this? And so I'm saying what Trump has done is expose the utter hollowness to which we have gone. And this means we need to take action. So there should be a discussion about that, instead of, a discussion about how wonderful the military operation was, or how brilliant the CIA's bribery of people around Maduro was, or how wonderful the stealth drones were that spotted Maduro's location. By the way, about 40 people apparently died in the attack on his to capture him, and a lot of other people were injured. And this wasn't a bloodless operation. But anyway, that's not the right topic. The right topic is, how do we restore some decent respect for norms that we all, in the abstract at least, agree with?
I mean, but your idea of a conference is very good. I mean, these create the new. I mean, BRICS is already on working on creating a new consensus, new norms, right, outside, and also new infrastructure that can be used. This will still take years, but one of the things that I think gives me hope is to see that even when we fail, we try again, right? We tried with the League of Nations to solve the war issue. We failed. We try with the United Nations. Obviously, we failed, but we try, right? So the question then is, like, if you copy paste it, if you can copy paste just part of the UN, of the experience of the UN, the part that worked best or is most, well procedurally is most useful, which part would you copy and then paste into that conference in order not to reinvent the wheel again with, the mistakes from before?
Well, I think you're right to focus in that context on the right of self-defense. There are other issues. The word terrorism is thrown around with wild abandon, but it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, and there are issues that need to be addressed. When I say ad hoc conferences, by the way, as an American, it distresses me enormously to have to advocate this kind of thing, isolating my own country, ostracizing it, because it has become an outlaw, which is what it is. And so what do you do with outlaws? You let them ride around in the wilderness if they want to, or you organize a posse and you go after them. But I think when I say ad hoc conference, it doesn't have to be universal. You could start with the reaffirmation of norms in a region. You could take, if you want, I mean, there are ideas out there. Of course, they're dismissed because of geopolitical considerations. China's put forward a set of ideas about a community of shared destiny and various rules about international security, which are very consistent with the Westphalian order and with the genius of the UN Charter in that regard. I mean, I think the Westphalian order is now destroyed. If one country can change the leadership in another, it will, on grounds that are largely manufactured disinformation rather than, even if they were true, why should anyone have that right? I mean, that's what the Treaty of there wasn't a Treaty of Westphalia, but the various agreements of Westphalia accomplished, and we've just undone it. Cuyo religio is gone. And so ideological struggles apparently are no longer relevant. I mean, so we have Donald Trump overthrowing the government in Caracas and then saying that the Nobel Prize winner, whom the CIA basically maneuvered into that position, doesn't have the respect of Venezuelans and therefore shouldn't be the governor of Venezuela. And this, we have Donald Trump saying Tony Blair should run Gaza. This is not, that is neocolonialism. This is just imperialism. And it involves an oil grab. So the Europeans are so embarrassed by that they talk about, well, you should, Carl Bildt says you should talk about democracy and freedom, but Trump doesn't give a fig about either. And we're losing both in the United States as I speak.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the question is this part of the United States reestablishing itself as a imperial hegemon, or is it part of the decay of the U.S. empire and it's basically Nero singing while Rome is already burning, right? But and there are both interpretations of this out there. But the question remains: what can the rest of the world, which is the global majority, actually do against it? Because with Israel, we've learned we were not even capable of doing something against genocide, even though large parts, including China, absolutely detest what is happening there. But due to the structures in place, you're frozen, and that's what enables the genocide in the end. So how to unfreeze the system?
So yes, it's the structural issues that we need to address. And let me say, for example, we have common planetary-wide problems, for which we need a planetary solution. Yeah. And the UN has traditionally been the provider of those solutions, but now it's blocked from doing so, for example, on climate change. Well, we have carbon trading systems and so forth. People are trying to reduce carbon emissions. And so why not have a conference that says, if you don't reduce carbon emissions, we're going to tariff you. We're going to borrow Donald Trump's lexicon, and we're going to put tariffs on you. In other words, if you don't act responsibly, we're going to penalize you. And does that have to go through the UN? I don't think so. Could Europe say to the United States, okay, if you're not going to do anything about global warming, your products are going to get taxed.
Yeah.
To help us do something, and we're going to penalize you, and so you have to consider the possibility maybe you ought to do something about this problem. If you are invading other countries, maybe one of the things that has to happen is that there's an agreement on sanctions being imposed. In other words, not subject to the veto, to a veto, right? Because it turns out that the worst offenders, at the moment at least, are the United States and Russian Federation, both of which have acted entirely outside any legal framework. I'd say in the case of the Russian Federation, there is a case to be made that the severance of Kosovo from Serbia and the dissolution of Yugoslavia set a precedent for the Russian annexation of Crimea. but they didn't set a precedent for what is now going on, which is clearly illegal, even if strategically it has a justification. So, okay, there's a strategic justification. You do something illegal, you pay a price. Russia has been paying a price. Not enough, because many countries, China and India, principal among them, don't feel bound by the need to punish the Russian action. So it basically, the Russians have impunity. They've not been isolated. They've been reoriented toward China, India, West Asia, and Africa. And so can we come up with structural fixes for these problems, which we have a lot of reason to understand these. And, I think you're not going to get that in the UN because you're going to get obstruction from one or another superpower.
No. But the question is a very difficult one of how then to create something else. It's easy to say we need that, right? We all know we need it, but what kind of mechanisms that are already there can we use to do so? It would be lovely if the China just said, like, let's do a big conference, everybody, and we'll implement this. But they are probably not going to do that because China is not the one that exposes himself that much.
Well, they also don't want to be the global leader.
No, but on the other hand, what we see is that there's very strong adherence by a large part of people to the idea of the law. The idea of law, even of international law, is a strong one. And what we've tried to do is to create a suprastructure, right, that then imposes the law. Could we use the opposite and say, like, okay, let's start working on our individual countries, all 193 or 200 of them, and try to work bottom up to say, like, okay, we're going to force Switzerland to put sanctions. We're going to force Singapore to put sanctions if X happens. And we just need a mechanism to coordinate then bottom up approach.
That's exactly my point. That this that people need to act, and if they can't act through the UN, they need to form coalitions to act, and to establish rules, which they follow, and to impose penalties where those are appropriate. Also, this is what is happening internationally. The WTO has been trashed by the United States. And earlier India blocked the trade liberalization effort by the WTO. Now the dispute resolution mechanism is blocked by the United States. But what is happening is regional variants of the WTO are being enacted. So you have the RCEP in Pacific, in Asia Pacific. You have now the Shanghai Cooperation Organization getting into rulemaking on trade. The BRICS have not done very much on this yet, but they're a potential factor. I mean, you have a Canadian EU trade agreement that has a duplication of the WTO dispute resolution mechanisms built into it. You don't have to have everything on a universal basis, but you can't, the fact that it can't be done universally is used as an excuse for not doing anything. And you have, I must say, by the way, that the most disgraceful statement about the Venezuelan issue came from Kaya Kallas.
Yeah.
It is the most weaselly, puppety. I mean, anyway, I have nothing good to say about her posture on much of anything these days. But very impractical and not even.
Sorry, she's the author and autocrat of the sanctions against EU citizens and Schengen area citizens like Swiss Jacques. And I mean, it's a totalitarian mindset. So I'm not surprised that totalitarian mindset is kind of applauding the totalitarian mindset of another one.
Well, I think yes, you and I have talked before. I don't know Jacques Boat, but I have the utmost sympathy for him. He's been victimized by an unelected bureaucracy, which has seized control of the European Union. And she's part of that, Kaya Kallas.
And
von der Leyen is part of it.
I can't get over the fact that she's the Soviet-born daughter of a communist apparatchik. I just can't get over that.
She's acting.
It doesn't even surprise me that she's doing this.
She's acting according to her heritage, I guess. But in the meantime, you know, I mean, there are all sorts of terrible issues in the United States. I think we are in a grave constitutional crisis. Obviously, we have a president who is utterly indifferent to the legal considerations, who uses the courts to ruin other people's lives by outspending them on lawyers' fees, and who ignores and who, you know, sues people for absolutely outrageous amounts of money on no basis at all. But I don't understand myself the complacency of many of my compatriots. You know, they sort of, people are groaning and moaning about this. Nobody's doing anything. And the same thing is true internationally. The United States is behaving in a completely lawless, callous, even sadistic manner. And what is being done to counter this? Nothing. You know, Keir Starmer says we'll look into this and make a decision. And Macron says, well, we hope there'll be democracy in Venezuela. And Kaya Kallas says, well, you know, we have to follow rules.
No, I mean, this is, again, like the example of Israel shows it. If the inertia of the system does not stop something, or that if the inertia of the system can be abused in order to do these kind of crimes, then you get away with it. And that's all you need, you know, that's
Exactly.
good enough.
Well, you know,
And it unfortunately it works. So the question is, how do we overcome the inertia of the system, or how can we use the inertia of the system to our advantage? Because overcoming inertia is really, really hard.
No, and of course, you know, there are other aspects of international law which have been overcome. I mentioned the Geneva Conventions, which are rather important.
Yeah.
By the way, there is a Geneva Convention that deals with the occupation of foreign countries, and that is going to be fairly important, whether the U.S. neocolonial occupation of Venezuela is indirect through a paramount chief, as it were, in the form, if we manage to seduce Delcy Rodriguez or intimidate her into cooperating, still those rules apply. There are other rules. For example, there's a right of armed resistance to occupation. You know, the Palestinians have not made much of that, but they have that right. And so do the Venezuelans. I don't think this is going to be a happy story for major American oil companies who think they're going to go in there and clean up. First of all, the cleanup process is going to take years. Second, I don't think it's going to be without casualties in the form of guerrilla warfare or other resistance, sabotage. You know, how can do you think the culture of Venezuelans, which derives ultimately from the culture of Spain, is one that puts a lot of emphasis on honor. And honor requires you to stand up and resist, and does not allow you to concede.
Yeah.
So I think this is, anyway, you know, the dog caught the car. Now what do you do? And I don't think Trump has an answer. I think his answer is, we're going to put a gun to the head of the driver, and, you know, then the driver is going to keep driving the way we want. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. I don't know Ms. Rodriguez, Vice President Rodriguez, at all, but I gather she's a woman of some principle and ability. And I think this is very questionable now, what is going to happen. And if, you know, this has all the potential to develop into a worse quagmire than Afghanistan was for the Soviet Union.
I for the sake of Venezuela, I hope it's not going to go down that route, because it was for Afghanistan. I mean, the country is destroyed. There's nothing left of the way it used to be before '89. Anyhow, Ambassador Freeman, Chas, thank you very much for your thoughts and insights about the analysis that you gave to us. People who want to follow you, they should go to your homepage in order to find your writings there, which you all like very skillfully collect and put on there. Is there any other place where people should find you?
No, well, there's actually a new site in Azerbaijan that is Deepfaked me.
Really?
It has saying all sorts of things which I never said and never would say.
Sorry.
I feel quite honored to be in the company of John Mearsheimer, who also has this phenomenon. But it's an honor I would rather avoid. I don't know who's doing it, but no, and I apologize to your viewers for being passionate and incoherent tonight. But, you know, I'm very distressed, and I think we all should be, about the collapse of the vision that my country was formed on. We began with a statement appealing to the decent opinion of mankind. And we give no attention at all to that now.
No.
And we are everywhere seen as a threat, not a potential ally. And we are attacking our allies as well as our partners, friends, and foes.
No, we should
not wise.
We should be distressed, you know, and I mean, we feel it. We feel that things are coming down left and right for the last couple of years. It reminds me of the feeling that I read, you know, when you look at literature from the turn of the century, you know, when people felt that things were changing and they were not changing in a good sense, and they were trying to do something against it. Let's not forget the two Hague peace conferences. 1899, 1907. That was an approach at doing something against what people could feel was not good. In the end, it collapsed in 1914, and now we understand why it did. And one day we will understand when it started collapsing in the 2020s. But right now, we're unfortunately before that collapse. And I pray to God that we can avoid it. I pray to God.
There is no Bismarck. And that was the end of the European order when Bismarck was set aside. You may not like him. You may think he was unscrupulous in some respects, but he held everything together. He knew how to manage it. And when he was gone, really, Kaiser Wilhelm and others were not up to the job. And now I think, you know, we have an issue. You're in Japan, and you have a prime minister who's female and who aspires to be Margaret Thatcher, but I think is more likely to work out to be Liz Truss.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I fear that. Japan is an enormously important country, and if it is poorly led, everybody suffers.
Yeah, no, and embroiling Japan in a war with China is very, very easy to do because you have the bases over here. I mean, it takes almost nothing. In any case, we will talk about this again, Chas, because the topic will stay with us, I think, unfortunately. But thank you very much for your time, and despite everything, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and to everyone else.